Bitcoin has been breaking towards the downside recently, and we need to be talking about this exactly. We need to be discussing, is the bull market over? Is things starting to flip around? And do we need to start being more cautious? I'm going to be covering this in today's video, and I have a lot of charts and a lot of data points actually ready for you guys. And we're going to be covering the news as well, so make sure to be staying tuned. We're also going to be covering Ethereum as well, and we're going to be looking at the relevant levels, and we're also going to be looking at the relevant scenarios and what's going to be happening next. So make sure to be staying tuned till the end. So with that being said, let's not waste any more time. Let's get straight away into this banger. Bow. So looking at the short term for Bitcoin, we can see that we've actually started to move towards the downside some more after yesterday's video. And you can see we started to break down from this upward sloping trend line. And we actually started to close below on that 2 daily time frame, confirming this breakdown. So we need to be seeing if we're going to be losing this low, since we still haven't created a lower low just yet. And we need to be evaluating this. Now, the first thing that we can look at is the liquidation heat map, and we can see that there's some downside liquidity piling up just below this recent low. So it is likely that we actually can continue towards the downside some more and actually start to grab that downside liquidity. Now, it's going to be very important the reaction that we get once we do move towards the downside, because we can see that we do have a little bit of an order block here, and we have this previous low. So if we actually hold that level and we start to see a bounce, we could actually start to confirm a double bottom over here potentially, and some sort of an inverse head and shoulders. But this is a bit too early to be actually calling out. We need to be actually seeing the reaction first of all. So that's one thing to note on the price action. But we can see that the market is actually trading in fear right now, and there's a lot of people actually fearful. And typically every time we trade in fear, we actually see a massive move towards the upside eventually. So again, it is likely that all this top side liquidity is going to continue to pile up as we move lower, and this can actually add fuel once we do start to reverse. So that's one thing to be watching out for in that shorter time frame. But the reason that we're actually dumping in the first place is the fact that we had GDP data coming out, and we had jobless claims actually coming out yesterday, and this was actually bearish data that came out. First of all, the jobless claims came in a lot lower than expected, indicating that the economy is doing quite well since there's less jobless claims actually coming through. And we actually had GDP actually coming in a lot higher, indicating that the economy is doing quite well, and the Fed may not need to cut rates to actually stimulate the economy. And this is actually bearish for risk markets, because liquidity actually comes from rate cuts, and this helps to move the market. And we can see that the probabilities came down from about 91.9%, and they actually came to about 85.5%. But after we got our PCE data actually coming out today, we can see that the PCE data actually came in the exact value, and it was coming in as expected. So we can see that the probabilities actually increased from that 85.5% to now 87.7%. So this indicates that the rate cuts are still heavily on the table. It's very likely we're still going to get rate cuts, but this is going to continue to alter and move around as we get more data coming in before that next FOMC meeting. But we can see that right now the probability of a rate cut is still quite strong. So I do think that we're going to be moving towards the upside in October. I still think it's likely, but right now we're seeing a bit of a pullback, as you can see. And I've got two different data sets over here, so we can see this was 2024 and this was 2023, and we can start off at 2023. We can see at the first few days of October we did move to the downside, but for the rest of October in towards November and December, so the rest of Q4 was actually massively bullish. And you can see as well here in 2024 that in towards October 1st, we actually dumped for the first few days before reverting towards the upside. And it may be a case that we're getting that dump a bit early, and in towards the 1st of October, we actually rally. So this is one thing to be watching out for. We can see the price action is quite similar with a trend line over here, and you know, we are creating a similar structure. So it's likely that we can actually start to revert towards the upside whenever we grab that downside liquidity potentially. You know, it depends on whether we're going to grab that first or move up, or if we're going to hold this low and this is going to be a higher low still and we're going to move towards the upside. So regardless of what it is, I think within this zone here, it's likely we can actually see at least a little bit of a bounce in towards October, since that's what we've been seeing historically. Now, looking at the Bitcoin RSI, we can see that it's extremely oversold right now, and it's actually starting to enter that territory where we actually seen previous bounces. And we can see on the screen here that previously, when we actually got to this metric where Bitcoin was this oversold on a 4-hourly time frame, we can see that we actually got nice bounces. So looking at that medium time frame, we can see that Bitcoin is still holding this support level at 107k. So until we can actually get a decisive break below this level, it is likely we continue to hold this level, and it's likely we can revert to the upside, whether we get that liquidity grab and close above this level again, and then we start to move towards the upside, or we just start to consolidate now before moving up. It is likely that we are still bullish as long as we hold this level. Now, looking at the monthly returns for Bitcoin, we can still see that September is green, and previously in 2024 and in 2023, September was green also, and we can see that when that happened, the rest of Q4 was actually massively green, and we had a massive Q4 as well. And we can see the same thing for 2016 and 2015. We've seen that we had a green September, and this led to a massively green Q4. Now, for that longer time frame, we can see that Bitcoin tends to like gold, and we're in that phase where it's quite choppy in Q3, and we can see previously in 2024, this was the exact case where we were quite choppy whilst gold moved towards the upside, and Bitcoin was lagging gold, but we eventually got that catch-up trade, and it's very likely that that's going to be the case again, and we're going to actually catch up to gold eventually now. So this is one thing to be watching out for in that longer time frame. We can also see that there's a lot of stable coins being minted. This week we had about $1 billion of USDT getting minted, and this just shows the amount of liquidity that's actually ready to flow into crypto and Bitcoin. And we can see that every time that the USDT and USDC market cap that's added together here has actually continued to be printed, Bitcoin tend to follow it. So it's likely that we actually start to follow it eventually, since we're moving towards the downside now. But as we continue to move towards the downside and stablecoins being printed, it's likely we actually converge again and we actually continue the correlation. Now, looking at Ethereum, we can see that the downside liquidity has been getting grabbed, and now the majority actually resides above us here. And we actually came towards this level over here that we were talking about in yesterday's video, and you can see that we're starting to get a little bit of a bounce, which is looking quite good. But we actually need to dissect if this is going to be a valid level for Ethereum to actually start to move towards the upside again, or are we going to be moving to the downside. But first of all, I'm going to be saying that Ethereum needs to actually see what Bitcoin is going to be doing. We can see that Bitcoin is still range bound. We're still trying to find some levels of support. So it is likely that if Bitcoin can actually hold our level of support, potentially after grabbing liquidity, then it's likely that Ethereum actually moves towards the upside also. But we can actually see over here that Ethereum had some liquidations, and we had the funding rates actually flipping negative. Now, the previous 2 times that this has happened, we've seen a massive bottom in Ethereum, and now this is happening again. So it is likely that Ethereum actually starts to move towards the upside eventually once Bitcoin finds that bottom. And we can see right now that Ethereum is actually starting to repeat that history, and this is potentially going to be the area where we get this liquidity grab if we can reclaim the range. So that's going to be looking quite good if that's the case. But at the minute, Ethereum is on support. We can see that Ethereum is actually following this V bottom scenario perfectly. We're retesting the neckline after a pullback, and typically once you see this, once you have a V bottom structure, you do get a move towards the upside. Now, the last time Ethereum saw this was in 2020, and right now we are repeating it again. And after this happened, we went parabolic for Ethereum, so I do think it's likely this happens once more. In addition, we can also see Ethereum is actually on massive support here for this right angle descending broadening wedge. So it is likely that if Ethereum can actually start to consolidate here and start to move towards the upside, this is going to be a massive move where we're going to start to move towards our target in and around that 6.4k mark. For that longer time frame, the MACD has been flipping bullish, and this is on a monthly time frame. And we can see that this month has been bullish for Ethereum so far. So it is likely that if we actually close September with a green histogram for the MACD, then this is going to continue to indicate that the strength in Ethereum is going to be massively parabolic, and we're going to continue towards the upside. So that'll be it for me. Make sure to follow me on X to be staying up to date with all my updates here, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a blessed rest of the day. Peace, guys. See ya. Bye-bye.